Hi, and welcome to English-Fabule. Are you learning English? Great. Let's learn English with a very interesting story. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment. Let's get started.
Leaders from the European Union and China met in Beijing for a big summit. The meeting took place in the Great Hall of the People. It was an important event to mark 50 years of diplomatic relations between them. People hoped it would be a celebration, but the mood was tense from the start. This showed that the relationship between the EU and China has many problems. The summit was planned to be 2 days long. However, it was suddenly made shorter. It lasted for only 1 day. This was an early sign that the two sides did not agree on important topics. It showed that they were there to talk about their differences, not to celebrate. The leaders made their positions clear at the beginning of the meeting. China's President Xi Jinping spoke first. He said that Europe's current challenges do not come from China. This was a direct answer to what European leaders had been saying for months. The President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, also spoke directly. She said that there are big imbalances in their relationship. She explained that the EU buys many more things from China than it sells to China. She said their relationship was at an inflection point. This means it is at a moment where things must change direction. Another EU leader, Antonio Costa, also spoke. He asked China to use its power to help end the war in Ukraine. The different ideas and the short meeting showed everyone that the EU and China are drifting apart. The time for an easy partnership seems to be over. 2. A big money problem. The relationship between the European Union and China involves a lot of money. They are two of the biggest traders in the world. But the way they trade has created a serious issue. The EU buys many more products from China than China buys from the EU. This imbalance is called a trade deficit, and it is a very big problem for Europe. The numbers show how large the problem is. In one recent year, the EU imported goods from China worth 519 billion euros. In the same year, China only imported goods from the EU worth 213 billion euros. This left a huge gap of about 306 billion euros. European leaders have said this situation is not balanced. They believe it is not good for the European economy. This problem did not happen overnight. The trade deficit has been growing bigger every year for the last 10 years. Leaders in Europe feel that something must change. A key reason for this problem, in Europe's view, is unfair competition. European leaders are worried that the Chinese government gives too much help to its companies. This support can be money or other advantages. When a government gives special help to its companies, it is called a subsidy. These subsidies allow Chinese companies to make their products and sell them at very low prices. It becomes very difficult for European companies to sell their own products when they have to compete with these cheap prices. Europe sees this as unfair. These tensions have caused specific trade disputes. One major fight is about electric cars. The EU has put an extra tax called a tariff on electric cars coming from China. They did this because they believe Chinese car companies get unfair subsidies. This makes their cars cheaper. China did not like this action. In response, Beijing started to investigate some products that Europe sells to China. These included European brandy, pork, and dairy products. This showed that China is willing to use its power to protect its interests. These fights over cars and food show that the money problem is real and getting worse. 3. The war in Ukraine. The war in Ukraine is a very big problem between the European Union and China. It is one of the most difficult issues they have. At their meeting in Beijing, their different views were very clear. The war was in its 4th year, and it was a very important topic for the European leaders. The EU wants the war to stop. European leaders believe China is one of the few countries that can influence Russia. This is because China and Russia have a strong partnership. At the summit, a top EU leader, Antonio Costa, asked China to use its power. He asked President Xi directly to help create a fair and lasting peace in Ukraine. He also wanted China to push Russia to respect international rules. But Europe feels that China is not a neutral country in the war. Instead, the EU believes China is giving quiet support to Russia. For example, China continues to trade with Russia. It also gives Russia diplomatic support in international meetings. This makes European leaders very frustrated and angry. The problem became bigger because of reports about Chinese companies. European intelligence reports said that some businesses in China were selling special technology to Russia. This is called dual-use technology. It can be used for normal things, but it can also be used by the military. This could be helping Russia's army. The government in Beijing said this was not true and denied giving any military help. Because of these concerns, the EU took a strong step. For the first time, it punished Chinese companies over the war. The EU put sanctions on 2 large Chinese banks. It said the banks helped Russia with money for the war. China's government was furious about this. It said the sanctions were wrong and would badly hurt trade with the EU. This disagreement showed the deep divide between Europe and China. 4. A special material. Another serious problem between the EU and China is about a special type of materials. These materials are called rare earth minerals. Most people do not know their name, but they are very important for modern life. We need them to make our mobile phones, computers, and televisions. They are also essential for green technology, like the batteries in electric cars and parts for wind turbines. China has a lot of power in this area. It controls almost all of the world's supply of these minerals, from mining to processing them. This means that companies in Europe and other parts of the world must buy them from China. For many years, this was not a problem, but the relationship between the EU and China became more difficult. Then, China decided to use its control as a tool. It suddenly limited the amount of rare earth minerals it would sell to other countries. The impact was immediate. This action created a crisis in Europe. European car factories were hit very hard. They could not get the minerals they needed for their electric vehicles. Some factories had to stop production completely for a short time. This meant that hundreds of thousands of cars were not built on time, and some workers could not do their jobs. Electronics companies also had problems getting parts for their products. European leaders were very worried and angry. They said that China was using its power over the minerals as a weapon in their political disagreements. This situation showed Europe a dangerous truth. Its most important industries were too dependent on China for these essential materials. This was not just a trade issue anymore. It was a security problem. Europe realized it needed to find other places to get these minerals, or it would always be in a weak position when negotiating with China. 5. America's role. The United States of America is another very important country in the world. Its actions affect many other nations. During this time, the president is Donald Trump. His government started a new trade war. This was not just with one country. The U.S. started this trade war with both the European Union and China. This meant the U.S. put new, high taxes on products it buys from them. These special taxes are called tariffs. For example, President Trump's government announced a 30% tariff on goods from the EU. The tariffs on Chinese products were even higher. Some were as high as 145%. This was a big problem for both European and Chinese businesses. This situation created a shared challenge for the EU and China. They were both targets of America's aggressive trade policies. Many people thought this would be a chance for them to work together. It seemed logical that they would unite against this common problem. Some observers hoped they would become strong partners and defend their interests against the United States. It looked like a moment for them to forget their own disagreements and find common ground. But this partnership did not happen. The shared trouble with America was not enough to bring them together. In fact, it did the opposite. It highlighted the deep problems that already existed between the EU and China. Instead of uniting, they focused on their own separate issues. For example, Europe was still worried about its big trade deficit with China. They could not agree on a plan to face the U.S. They also chose different strategies to handle the American tariffs. The European Union tried to protect itself by negotiating its own special deal with the U.S. This approach made Chinese officials unhappy. China wanted a more unified front against what it saw as American protectionism. The American trade war did not build a bridge between the EU and China. It only made their own disagreements and different ways of thinking more obvious. It added another difficult layer to their complicated relationship. 6. A broken deal. A few years ago, the EU and China almost made a very important deal. This plan was for investment and business. Its official name was the Comprehensive Agreement on Investment, or CAI. Leaders from both sides worked on this big agreement for 7 years. It was a long and difficult process with many meetings. Finally, in December 2020, they reached an agreement on the main ideas. Many business leaders and politicians were hopeful. They believed it would be the most important economic deal ever between the EU and China. The CAI was designed to help both sides. It promised to give European companies fairer access to the huge Chinese market. For years, European businesses complained that the rules in China were not fair. The deal was supposed to fix this. It would also open European markets more for Chinese investment. The main goal was to make business rules clear and to protect the money companies invested. But this landmark deal never happened. It is now frozen, like a ship stuck in ice. The reason for this was a serious political disagreement over human rights. The European Union was very worried about the situation in Xinjiang. It believed that human rights were not being respected there. Because of this, the EU used sanctions against some Chinese officials as a form of punishment. China was very angry about these sanctions. Beijing said the EU should not get involved in its internal problems. In response, China put its own sanctions on several European politicians and official groups. This action caused a strong reaction in Europe. The European Parliament could not accept that its members were being punished. So, its members voted to stop all work on the CAI. Today, the deal is in limbo. It is not cancelled, but it is not moving forward. It shows that political trust is gone. The failure of the CAI is a powerful symbol. It proves that economic benefits are no longer enough to keep the relationship strong. Political values and security are now just as important, and they are creating deep problems. The broken deal shows that the era of easy partnership is over. 7. Different ways of thinking. The problems between the European Union and China are not just about money or trade. The biggest reason for their disagreements is that they have very different ways of thinking. These differences are deep and affect everything from business to government. It is hard for them to understand each other because their basic ideas about the world are not the same. This makes finding solutions very difficult. First, their economic systems are not alike. In Europe, most countries have market economies. This means companies compete with each other, and the government has rules to make the competition fair. In China, the government plays a much bigger role in the economy. It gives its own companies a lot of help with money and support. European leaders feel this is unfair. They believe Chinese companies have a special advantage. This makes it hard for European businesses to compete equally. This is a core problem in their economic relationship. For many years, Europe mostly thought about business when it looked at China. Trade and investment were the most important things. But this is changing. Now, European leaders are also thinking more about security. They worry about depending too much on China for important products. For example, they need special materials from China to make cars and phones. This makes Europe feel weak. Leaders now want their countries to be more independent and to protect their own important industries. This new focus on safety changes how they see their relationship with China. The political systems in Europe and China are also completely different. The countries in the EU are democracies. This means leaders are chosen by the people in elections, and public opinion is very important. In recent years, many people in Europe have started to see China in a more negative way. This makes it difficult for their leaders to be friendly with Beijing. China has an authoritarian system of government. This means one party has control, and leaders do not need to win elections. This creates a large gap in understanding and trust between the two sides. From Beijing's point of view, Europe is not being fair. Chinese leaders feel that Europe is being hypocritical, which means it says one thing but does another. They say that European governments also help their own big companies, like those that make airplanes or sell farm products. They believe Europe is complaining only because Chinese companies are now very successful. China also feels that Europe is not making its own decisions. They think European leaders are just following the lead of the United States. Beijing believes Europe is choosing to side with America against China instead of building its own strong partnership. 8. The future of the relationship. The big meeting in Beijing showed that the relationship between the EU and China is changing. An important European leader said they are at an inflection point. This is a moment when something big changes direction. The old way of working together is not possible anymore. For many years, the relationship was simple. It was mostly about business, buying and selling goods. But now, trust is low, and there are too many problems. The future is not clear. There are a few different paths the relationship could take. One path is more competition. The EU and China will continue to be rivals. They will compete to make and sell the best technology, like electric cars and green energy products. This could lead to more arguments and trade problems. Another path is that they will slowly move apart. This is sometimes called decoupling. It means they become less connected. For example, European companies might build new factories in other countries instead of China. China might find new places to sell its products. This would be a very slow and expensive process. It is difficult because their economies are so closely linked. A third path is a major crisis. A big political disagreement or a new trade war could break the relationship suddenly. This would be very bad for businesses and workers in both Europe and China. It would create huge problems for the global economy. The time of easy partnership is over. Now, difficult issues like security, human rights, and different political systems are more important than just business. Both the EU and China must make hard choices. They can try to find small areas where they can still work together, like on climate change. or they can accept that they are now mainly competitors. The choices they make will be important for the whole world. Do you think the EU and China can repair their relationship, or will they become bigger rivals?
Hey there! Just a second before you go. If you learned something new today, please give this video a like, write your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel. It only takes a second, and it really, really helps to create even better English videos for you. Your support means the world. Thank you.